Joel, you've probably got more experience on podcasts than I have. You were telling me earlier that you've been using voice clone technology to produce your podcast, but today I'm really pleased that we've got you in person, the real voice. But just tell me what your experience has been on using voice cloning.
Yeah, thanks, John. Thank you for having me on the podcast. So this is the real me. The cloned me is used with the 11 Labs service for our weekly news podcast. We do an AI news roundup every week. And the standard voices you get with 11 Labs tend to be quite monotonic. So what we do is clone our own voices and then use those to convert to a professional voice, and you get a little bit more intonation. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I've had a few more hours on that podcast than I have in real life, but it's great to be here in person.
Brilliant. Well, we're really pleased that you've been able to take the time to come across to us here on Bishopsgate to talk to us. So Joel Miller from Exobrain, which is an AI consultancy and also an Engine member. Tell us a little bit, Joel, about your background and what Exobrain aims to do.
Yeah, so my background is over the last 20 years or so, about 15 of those years spent in working in asset management and wealth management. Spent a number of years at Janus Henderson, and then more recently Schroders. And then over the last 5 years, I've been working in large consulting firms, Accenture and Deloitte. And over that time, a lot of the work in those asset management years were around digital transformation, client experience, D2C systems, basically digitizing processes with technology, working in the technology teams in those companies. And then more recently in the consulting firms, it was around advanced analytics and the belief that a lot of more complex problems in business could be solved with machine learning based systems. So that was sort of an experience that I've had in both technology, in the industry, and the impact of the latest technology and machine learning, etc. But obviously now we're in this new wave. And so last year I got together with a former colleague who also worked at some of those firms and has experience in the industry. And we set up a challenger consultancy called Exobrain. And our vision is really to create a new kind of consultancy for this new age.
And I know that you've been doing a lot of work by looking specifically at the asset management sector. And recently you published a report which has an outline of how AI could potentially be included within the sector. And the report talks about the increasing effect of combining compute, data and algorithms, and associated to that also the laws of scaling. What does this tell us, do you think, about what's coming up in the next few years?
Yeah, so what we tried to do in our report, which we published a few months back, it was connect the big picture around AI progress, which we spend a lot of time looking at and following and thinking about, and then the practical implications for the asset management industry and this sector, given our experience and network in the industry. And what's fascinating, I think, is that a lot of people don't necessarily appreciate the trajectory we're on right now and the growth in some of the big forces that are driving the power and potential capability of the latest AI models. So we're in a sort of a situation where I think people are, generally aware, but perhaps not seeing the direct impact yet. So we try to set out the direction of travel and then connect that back to, use cases in the industry and real impacts. And I would say that the trajectory is quite a remarkable one, really. We've seen computing, doubling for decades. The Moore's law growth in computing power. But what you're seeing now is also the amount of data that we've got available in various systems in the cloud and on the internet that can be meaningfully used for training large models. We've got a huge amount of algorithmic progress happening. You can see that in the last few years, the cost of these models are reducing rapidly, such that the cost of inference for the OpenAI models has dropped 200-fold in 2 years. So we're seeing all of these forces combine, and we're kind of on this precipice, really, where we might have imagined that computing power has been significant over the last few decades. What faces us in the next sort of 6 to 10 years is hundreds, perhaps even millions of times more sort of powerful than what's gone to date. And so the question is, how does that impact business? How does that impact the sector? How does that impact many aspects of what we do? We try and think about that. And we've got some sense in the report, but we've been doing some work since we published the report around what the sort of next 6 to 12 months and beyond might look like for businesses.
And the data point, I just want to pick up on that, because data quality, not just in asset management, but generally, across all financial services sectors, has been a notorious challenge as that kind of data explosion that you mentioned has taken effect. To what extent do you think that is being solved in the near term, or actually we just storing up huge problems for the future if we're using AI to analyze data that's inherently inaccurate or outdated?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's a definite connection between data as a driver for this trajectory of capability growth and the data that we're all using and adding to and sitting on in different firms in the sector. The unlock that a lot of the labs in training these big models are working on right now is the use of synthetic data generation and the use of the AIs that they've created in improving the quality of the data that they use. And for a while, there was a concern, I think, that the sort of lack of high quality data across the internet was going to create a sort of data wall, as was described. But the synthetic sort of data cleansing, the ability for AI systems to look at data at scale and improve it has unlocked that for a lot of the labs, and that shouldn't now be the challenge many felt it might be. And I think that applies then to asset management firms. Absolutely, data will have inherent quality issues. Some will be better quality than others. We've done a number of through Exobrain with clients around this data quality challenge, and we've discovered that what's possible now is that maybe the human oversight or the human analysis or processing of that data that was really the only solution for improving quality in the past is now no longer a constraint. You can build AI systems, you can train agents to do a lot of the quality work, and you can kind of lift the overall data quality within an organization, quite significantly. And that will only continue as these models get more powerful. And then the models also give you better access routes and points to the data. So, advanced analytics is often the preserve of those who've worked out how to do that, complex processing and manipulation. But AI tools, we're building solutions for clients that allow non-technical, non-specialist analysts to actually get really deep insights from their data, on top of that sort of quality improvement that the agent-based processing of the data allows. So you've got that sort of combined effect that is really quite exciting for this industry.
Very good. So the report, which was authored with your partners at FVEN, was published in July. It's called A White Paper, AI in Asset Management. And it really caught my eye because of the 10-point checklist that you outlined. So 10 steps that asset managers need to take urgently, really, due to the compounding factors that you mentioned earlier. What would you say are the most important of those 10 in terms of firms taking that forward?
Yeah, it's tough. I think we sort of had a job reducing that number down really to a set of parallel tasks that we feel all asset managers should be embarking on. But I think if there were sort of 3 to draw out, it would be firstly experimentation. So Exobrain is built around one of the principles that experimentation is critical at this time, given the speed this technology is moving at, the novel use cases that are not necessarily obvious that need to be discovered, really need to be dug out from all the potential places that where this tech can have an impact. And then the fact that the models are moving so quickly, the capabilities are moving so quickly, organizations really need to be able to retest what they've experimented with on a continuous basis, because competitive advantage could be missed if that process isn't continuous. So experimentation, and especially experimentation with agent-based systems. So we help organizations move from assistive AI, which is generally just allowing individual users to micro delegate tasks, to automated AI systems where you connect various process steps that are automated together, to more agentic, is the phrase, systems that are autonomous, that can solve open-ended problems and can plan and collaborate and organize themselves. And experimenting in that space is it's still right at the edge of what's possible, but the speed of progress will mean that then trying to catch up when those systems become entirely practical and entirely usable in not too short amount of time will be very hard for organizations. So this continuous experimentation and having agents working for them and starting to scale that agent workforce up is crucial, we think. So that's one big area. I think a second area would be around builder empowerment. So one of our checklist points is helping people build with AI. And that's first the software and engineering teams that a lot of these asset managers have, but then what are called citizen developers, so individuals around the organization who, are very creative, potentially understand their problem space, and with the right AI tools and the right support could create novel solutions for themselves and for their team members, and be very creative and bring back some of the flexibility of technology rather than all the standardization that's really gone on over the last few decades. And the third area, which is I guess a natural counterpoint to those two is governance and security. All of this development, all of this creative use of software and AI to solve problems creates a much more complex landscape for management and governance. So bringing AI to that space using more dynamic control frameworks, more real-time risk analysis, and then ensuring that, probably some of the challenges that are going to come in the cyberspace are really, thought about by these organizations and tackled, because we haven't quite seen the implications yet, but they're also coming down the track as much as the positives.
Absolutely. We've seen, lots of discussion within our member fora on the risks, but in particular on cyber security, where cyber enabled threats, are really taking off and have done over the past 18 months or so. So I think that is a really important area. And I think the urgency that you've sort of outlined there is really relevant as well. Now, point 10 also, caught my eye. So that talks about creating a center of excellence for AI within the institution, and also to look at advanced computation. Now, that's no small undertaking. I imagine that would take quite some investment, both from a resourcing perspective, but also financially. To what extent, and firms are obviously under such a lot of cost pressure at the moment, what is the impetus there? What's its overall significance, and why should firms really prioritize this area for future spend?
Yeah, so the Centre of Excellence idea is really around the fact that AI is naturally sort of homed in a particular part of the organization. It's going to cut across lots of different teams and parts of a company. And thus, there needs to be some sort of organizational structure which connects up activities. So, there is in the paper some suggestion around a kind of step-by-step process to get to that center of excellence, perhaps starting with something like a community of excellence, where you bring together people who are engaged, interested, already active, many more so probably than, many people realize, in terms of using the technology. So community of excellence would be our first sort of recommendation and step. But then, that probably needs to get a little bit more structured around making sure that there's joined up governance thinking. Back to the point earlier around governance and security being critical, structured in terms of being able to make the right choices around where to invest in, new AI initiatives, new tech. Lots of teams will be perhaps going off in different directions. So there needs to be a sort of strategic layer to that center of excellence. And then operationally, delivery wise, really tracking how systems are being built with AI, what systems are being deployed, sharing best practice. A lot of that, I think, can be achieved just through coordination and community structure, and then formalized gradually over time as an actual center of excellence, perhaps with some sort of leadership, although that could be fractional leadership, and then ultimately distributed out across the organization. So the excellence is everywhere and everyone has the sort of templates they can reuse.
Now, Joel, it's a very wet and overcast day in London today, and summer seems like a long time ago. And of course, although July was just a short few weeks ago, a week is a long time in AI, and lots is really happening in the marketplace. I'm looking forward to Apple Intelligence on my smartphone that's coming quite soon. But there's been lots of other sort of model development in the news. Has that really changed anything that you've put in your report, or what do you see as the implications of that for the future?
Yeah, I think the big news, I suppose, in the last few months has been the release of O1, which is the new OpenAI model. Or model family. So they've reset their naming convention from GPT 1234 to O1 because they feel it's a big leap, and they talk about it as the first of a series of models that can do true reasoning, whereas previous models they talk about as really only being kind of basic chatbots. So that's quite, I think, a significant development. We're only a week into people getting their hands on O1. We've been using it quite extensively in the last week, and probably what it changes in terms of what we saw on the report was the speed of progress in our view around the trajectory, the ability for this model to reason, over very complex tasks is clear. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be instantly usable or indeed available to everyone, because it's clearly quite expensive to run. And so there's a sort of only limited access. But, I've been quite surprised. We've been quite surprised by how far that's moved on what is apparently still quite a small model. So it's probably not the GPT-5 scale that is coming next, or Grok 3 or Gemini 2 or any of those sort of next generation models. So it shows again that the algorithmic progress is substantial. You can extract more from something that is smaller and more current generation. And so you scale that up with these scaling laws. It's going to be particularly fascinating to see what the next generation with this reasoning thinking technology applied to it. So that's really interesting. And also very hot off the press is Microsoft's announcement around Copilot Wave 2 and their attempt really to to tackle the adoption challenge, which is really apparent in that these models are getting smarter, but the uses and the level of deployment and the level of understanding and perhaps even the level of value that people are seeing from AI is still not moving at that same rate. So you've got a divergence of those two trajectories. So Microsoft clearly want to make sure that all of their investment in the infrastructure can actually be fed through to products that people use. So they're looking at new ways for people to interact with AI. They've got a Pages product, which perhaps creates that bridge between the chatbot interface, which is quite limiting, and where you actually do your work, which is, in collaborative spaces. And they're also adding chatbots plus Python code to Excel, which could be a very interesting combination, and democratizing the ability for people to build complex analytics without necessarily all that expertise and knowledge, which in financial services and asset management could be a real unlock as well. So there's a lot happening. And then we've got, much more to come in the next few months with these next generation models.
So all of that really just emphasizes even more the urgency of some of the recommendations that you've put in your report. So thank you, Joel, coming in and explaining that to us. Really useful. Thank you. There's a link. There's a report in the description of this podcast so that our listeners can go and access that at their leisure. I hope the audience has found this to be a useful discussion. If you have done, please like the podcast series. That really helps others to find it. And we'll have another episode of IA Talks AI coming very soon.